Hard act to follow, huh? But in reality, where you left off is where I should begin. It's this Alliance for Prosperity and the $700 million that are going to be allocated over there are being sold as a way to reduce the gang violence that have perpetrated throughout Central America, and 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 they're selling it also as prevention and intervention programming that's going to be developed throughout Central America to address the issue of why youth get into gangs, but also how to have reentry programs. And that's the way they're selling it. But the large percentage of those funds are going to be used for repression. They are going to be used to continue the initiatives, for large corporations to be able to continue their investment in the revitalization of El Salvador in one case, and Central America. But in El Salvador's case, primarily, there's been this sense of redevelopment throughout the country, what I call the gentrification of a country, in which are pushing our low impoverished communities, people out of Central America into that cash flow of export that is the biggest money making machine, which is people. That's the number one export of our Central America, because those are the what the folks maintain those countries, meaning that those people, once they get to the United States, they start making those countries run through the remittances that they send back, which is critical because those monies are going back to those rich folks now, especially in El Salvador, where the colon was dollarized, right? We have Washington D.C. controlling the economy down there, so it is clear that these initiatives have no sense of clear vision in regards to how they're going to reduce violence. Not only by the gang problem, which is what they say is primarily causing the mass flow of unaccompanied minors coming up, but also the general violence and criminality that exists already in El Salvador. We got to understand one thing clear though, that the gangs not necessarily were exported down to Central America. Violence and gangs already existed in Central America. Gang members that were deported down to Central America were individuals that had been criminalized here as young men and women. We're talking about the mass incarceration, which is also making millions for those corporations that are running the criminal industrial complex, and also the privatized prisons that are now taking over many of those facilities in other states because of the mass incarceration. Now there is a big talk. Even President Obama spoke on the issue of that needs to change. And it needs to change. In California, we have Proposition 47 passed by the voters, which basically reduces some felony convictions to misdemeanors. But it doesn't underline the factors in which many people continue to be incarcerated, and that is impoverished communities, lack of social services, lack of interest to really redevelop communities where it could keep the families in those communities and prosper out of poverty. Instead, they're being pushed away to other communities, which and so is also expanding the issue of youth violence. Now we have one of the main gangs that's widely known, Mara Salvatrucha, in many states throughout the country. That wasn't a tactic or a strategy, internal strategy of the gang. It wasn't their intentions to expand and become a super gang. It was their survival due to policies that have been enacted towards them. It's starting with the gang injunctions, which is Los Angeles has become the primary tool to use to get rid of gangs in particular neighborhoods. By them implementing those gang injunction means that law enforcement has continued right to harass individual based on the color of their skin, based on them being a certain criteria, based on being a young male in the community, based on the geography of where you work, where you live in, and the continued harassment and incarceration for a year at a time, in which they come back out and continue the cycle of this mass incarceration tool that's being used now. The federal government has come after and used a similar tool, which is the RICO. The RICO Act was introduced in the 60s and 70s and used primarily to go after organized crime structures such as the Italian mafia. But now it's being used primarily to go after gangs. It's being used primarily to go and incarcerate individuals that are not hiding the fact that they belong to a gang. Actually, they want their gang to be noticed differently from any organized crime structures that want to become secretive and make millions and millions out of funds. Gang members are not like that. They're street. They want to have recognition. They want to show territory and control. And it's easily to prosecute a gang because they have already admitted they're part of the gang. The government, all it has to do is put the different components that crimes have been committed on behalf of the corporation, and that basically makes it a federal crime, which is easily done. Wiretaps, they have the freedom to use wiretap and other tools in law enforcement that typically they wouldn't be able to use. So I consider the RICO Act the new gang injunction by the federal government to get rid of people easily putting them through the criminal justice system. I think that all of these policies that have been used in order to mass incarcerate and mass deport people, like the 1996 Anti-Terrorist Act laws and the IRA, that basically it was the stepping stone in basically deporting mass quantities of peoples that have been criminalized. Individuals that could had not have committed a crime in 10, 20 years now fell under that bracket of being put in deportation proceedings, even if they were here legally, had been a resident for a long time, or even served in the military for that matter. Now, these individuals were deportable based on that law that continues to this day be used to go after individuals that have been criminalized. Now, we have to go back a little and understand, why all these youth are fleeing now. All these youth in Central America are coming up, as we were hearing earlier by Professor Alfonso Gonzalez, is that this is nothing new to us. This has been an ongoing systematic, refuge of young kids fleeing a impoverished, dangerous environment that they have been growing up in way before the Civil War. I was one of those unaccompanied minors in 1979. I was left behind by my parents at age 3 and my little brother at a year and a half. 5 years later, total strangers came and told us that they were going to go and reunite us with our families, with our real biological parents. And we came on this journey as unaccompanied minors, me being 7 years old and my brother 5. And we came through Mexico. It wasn't as bad as it was now, but I remember peeing in my pants from being afraid. I remember being threatened if I wouldn't recognize them or that couple that was bringing me as my father and my mother. I was totally and forever be separated from my real parents if I didn't say those words, if we were stopped. And we did get stopped at the border. And I say, él and ella, that mom and dad, right? Because I knew that if I didn't say that, I was going to be separated forever. Who knows what I would be now? But that was just a stepping stone. To go into a community with these people you don't know and see the exchange taking place between two people, and money being exchanged for your release into those hands of those people, and you're now with those people that are presumably are your parents, and you don't know them. You do not know those parents anymore because you have been separated from them for so long. My brother and I were holding hands, not knowing we were sold. There's no difference to what's going on today. It's no different. I'm working with unaccompanied minors in Los Angeles because they're fleeing not only the gang violence, which is typically, what is being scapegoated as, but they're fleeing poverty. They're being sent because of this fear of this violence. They're being sent down to come up by their parents. Many of them didn't even want to leave. But some of them had real clear issues and fears of the gang problem, but also many of them had expressed how many times they were beaten by law enforcement, how many times they had to run away from them. But most recently, many of them that run now, that are not gang members, are being shot by authority down there, especially in El Salvador right now, by the military that's out there and also that's out in the community, trying to put a dent in this violence, but also by the National Civil Police. Every day that I meet with these kids in the schools in which I work in, they're telling me, my cousin got killed yesterday. 3 of my friends were executed by the military. My mom is being threatened with the extortion money of a gang. We have business people that have come and called me trying to see if there's a way to fix an extortion problem, in which I try, and it so happened that the gang's denied trying to extort this business person. And it goes to show that, not the gangs are not doing all the extortion, because this gentleman came back to me and said, forget about it, Alex. We found out it was my brother-in-law that was doing that on his own sister. He was passing himself by a gang member. So we're seeing that people are taking advantage of a clear demonized population, which is a gang member. Once you use the word gang, nobody wants to help. Once you use the word gang, nobody wants to be involved with it or associated with it. So everything falls on that title. So instead of using gangs, why don't we say criminalized individuals, right? Because that's who they are. We see them being criminalized as soon as they come. I see this young man right now who came, that everybody's worried about the issues of reunifying with their family, which is important, the issue of legal representation in their immigration courts, it's extremely important, and the issue of mental health, that is critical. Some of these kids have real health problems of the trauma that they witness in their countries. They tell their stories in their healing circles in a way that it's a story that they're telling about somebody else. No emotion. They're placing themselves out of those stories they tell. And they're pushing people away. Our focus is not on those 3 issues, those 3 needed support and services. Our issue is what happens to them once they come into our communities. What happens once they get enrolled in their school? What happens once they go into those communities which has gangs, has violence, has drugs, prostitution, massive poverty? What happens after they reunify with family members they haven't seen in 13, 15 years? How's that relationship? Now, a small percentage of them are having a hard time. That's the population that I'm working with that small percentage of them. Their lack of interest in their education is 0. They're telling us, I came to the United States to work, not to go to school. There's no interest in their academia because they don't understand the material. There's so many of them now that the schools don't know what to do. And then LAUSD is a huge, huge school district. And when we first brought it up to many other schools in the area that we needed to set something up when these kids came into the school district, they said, oh no, we've dealt with ESL school kids before. Then months later, we're getting a call. Alex, look, I sent some pictures over to you by phone. Tell me what they are. Yeah, I saw them. I said, well, what's 503? I said, well, you're in trouble now. Because remember, when these kids are fleeing and they're coming here, they're coming to an environment that's totally alienated. They're isolated. They're alone. They don't have their friends. And the family, they just got to know. Their little brothers that were born here don't even speak Spanish or want to. Step-parents, stepmothers become an issue. You become an issue. Another mouth to feed. Already in a impoverished home. All those issues come into play. Nobody's working on those topics. So what happens when this kid goes to the school and has to deal with other kids that are listening to what Trump is saying, other kids that are discriminatory towards another class? I mean, these kids are already being victims of violence in those communities in South Central LA. They're already being jacked. They're having this other perspective of what an African American is because they're already falling victim of it, either by robberies or putting guns to their heads and taking their stuff. These kids are seeking how to feel protected. And they already been knowing that the gangs could provide that. They already been knowing that those specific, the gangs provide that protection. It provides a unity. It provides camaraderie. It provides what they need at that moment. So it's not difficult for them to all of a sudden start writing something that's related to them culturally, like 503, which is the Salvadorian National International Area Phone Area Code. Right? The teachers didn't know this. But they have already developed a group in which they have similar issues, similar cultural connection within that group to protect themselves from other groups outside in the playground. So we've been working with those kids. Not only have we been working with them to try to help them deal and integrate, with the what's happening around their community, but also not to fall victims. How to survive within a system that's been already put up against them. But how have they been survivors of the violence already that they've already experienced? And probably these kids in this school will never even come close. But how can we not intervene with these kids if we know that one thing could tick them off over the edge and they already have experienced violence? So we have a crisis that one part is coming here and overwhelming the government, and putting them in homes and whatnot. But the other crisis will be, how will these kids incorporate themselves into our communities? How are we going to put in programs in place that will intervene from these kids not becoming criminalized and fall into the criminal justice system and mass incarceration and then deportation, and they become another statistic? Because that's what happened to me. I was deported in 1994 after becoming a member of a gang, after I was seeking that attention, after I was seeking that protection that nobody gave me. I didn't feel safe. And we cannot make that same mistake that was done in the 80s be the mistake that we're doing now. We cannot just focus on trying to change a system elsewhere or specific services, but how can we stop our kids from falling through the cracks in our community? And it's all about looking at these initiatives that we're talking about. How are our governments in Central America be held accountable? We need them to be held accountable of why they're exporting our people and putting our children in danger. There needs to be a stop to that, and I think that that's the key. It's not about immigration reform. Most of us and most of these kids will never want to come to this country. It's about how do we hold those countries accountable to provide the necessary means in a humane way for people to stay and prosper in those countries. That will stop the immigration problem. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.